Welcome, everyone, to You Are the Cosmos global event, in which we call forth the deep wisdom of our unique abilities of the sacred self. In this time of great change, there is a strong movement toward reclaiming our power as masters of co creation with our Mother Earth to transform our world. I am your host, Amanda Kolbaba, and today I'm excited to present Darren Austin Hall. Darren Austin Hall is a spiritual teacher, sound channeler, mystical musician, author, poet, and ecstatic dance DJ facilitator. He is the creator of the Source Resonance Academy, devoted to leading sound healing training retreats, intensives, and workshops around the world to initiate others onto the path of using sacred sound as a medicine of the soul. He shares his legendary Sacred Sound Journey concerts around the world and is a renowned recording artist. His new book, Love's Revolution, is an enthralling collection of writing, short stories, and poetry, which offers a captivating and provocative exploration of the burgeoning realm of sacred sexuality and the revisioning of intimate relationships as pathways of conscious partnership and embodied mysticism. His topic of discussion today is sacred sexuality and devotional embodiment. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you, Amanda. Beautiful introduction. Your
Thank
summit
you.
sounds so amazing. I love the connection with Mother Earth, particularly.
Yes, I think that's such a strong pull right now. And I think everybody is feeling it around the world, wanting to reconnect again with her and that respect there and that deeper understanding and connection is happening. So it's very exciting.
Yes, totally agree.
So I'm very excited with your topic today. I think this is going to be quite fascinating and juicy. So my first question for you is, what is sacred sexuality?
Yes, no, I love sharing on this as well because when it comes to embodying our sense of our sacredness and I'm a real stickler for words. I love looking up the etymology of words and sacred to me from my learnings it comes from like an Anglo-Saxon root word called sac, which means to connect to a higher source of power. And I do think as we're going in this holy shift right now, it is about humans really connecting to a more deeper sense of empowerment. You look around the world, it's a lot of wars, still these tired wars going on, political power plays. But behind the veneer of all this media matrix, there's a real awakening happening, as your summit is really all about, beautifully so. And people are really starting to establish what is it to be rooted in like a much more natural and true form of power. And sexuality is just, it's such a topic because it's truly one of the most potent energies in our being. It's highly connected to our creativity. And I've been teaching sacred sexuality well over a decade, mostly because I came to it from my own wounds, my own sort of just like trying to sift through the morass of my own life, just receiving the education, the conditioning that I received on sexuality, which really sets us all up in the West for just a lot of fragmented relationships and toxicity and really hardly any education on what is sexuality, was it to be a healthy sexual person. So I, very early on in my 20s, when I discovered spirituality, also found things like tantric sexuality, sacred sexuality. And what I started to glean was that there was not only like these novel understandings about taking sexuality and placing it into the context of it being part of our spirituality, a means to merge, to create oneness with another person in intimate partnership. But it was also this very ancient taproot that goes all the way back to ancient times, whether it's the Taoists in the Orient, the Tantrikas, and of course the Vedic culture of India, but also in the West with the chivalry traditions of the Romantic ages. This notion that sexuality is actually an expression of the soul on a very deep level, that there's something really beautiful about making love. I mean, we call it making love. What a beautiful encapsulation of what this could be. And I feel it's really a big project to re-enchant our world right now, to really reclaim the beauty that is the essence of our divine life. And when you look at sexuality and how it's portrayed in the media, I mean, it's all very lustful, very superficial. The world is rife with porn addiction, particularly with men, and there's just clearly a lot of wounds there. So we need to really make our sexuality encounter the sacred, this holy sort of space where we can use our sex for something higher, for something healing, even. Um, and as toxic as it is in the world, this gives us an opportunity to really look at that and be compelled to write a new story. And so it really put me on my own path formally of just exploring this whole realm of how can my very ardent spiritual path at the time in my 20s, particularly because I just found like God basically. How can I integrate my sexuality? It's still an ongoing journey, but it's been one of the most wonderful journeys of my life.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Um, can I ask you to go a little bit into depth into your journey? Are you open to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
I
you.
mean, it's very much encapsulated in my book too, Love's Revolution. There's a whole chapter called Dancing with Darkness. And interestingly, just a little tidbit, because I just released this book a year ago. It's my first book on sacred sexuality and all these things that we're discussing. This particular chapter, my editor, initially I didn't want to put it in the book because it's very vulnerable writing about, dances that I've had with sexual addiction, pornography addiction, and that can look many different ways in people's lives. But for me, what really brought me into like this kind of yearning for like the sacred water of sacred sexuality was that my sexuality was highly repressed, and I was highly unsure on how to really use sexuality in a beautiful way, how to truly love. I'm heterosexual, so how to truly love a woman. I had no idea that things like semen retention were very important for men, that with too much ejaculation, which definitely happens with pornography addiction, there's this endless leaking out of one's energy. And this leads to a ravaging of the nervous system. Pornography addiction, as it's gone, especially in the internet, which gives you this like hyper sensational experience of porn, it absolutely wrecks the dopamine system in our neurology. So, this hormone of dopamine, it really gives us a sense of like, feeling fulfilled in life. It really makes you feel like this kind of contentment with things, but it's also rules over our reward circuitry. So craving for something, and it's something that we really have to keep um, under control. And I know that word is very triggering to people. I love the Taoist phrase. They say angelic control is needed in the realm of sexuality. So what I discovered was that as I was in my teenage years and then my 20s, of course, human beings were so sensitive, and we're being born in this culture that is filled with like all kinds of societal pressures. A lot of us feel like we don't fit in, and a lot of us are dealing with mental health issues, especially when we're teenagers, when we're coming through all these hormonal shifts. It's a time when usually there was initiation ceremonies to take girls and boys into womanhood and manhood and mature them, and we've lost that in our culture. So teenage years can be some of the hardest years for a person's life because you're coming out of the Garden of Eden of childhood, where all your needs are sort of taken care of by the parental units, and then all of a sudden you're thrust in this world where pop culture is so focalized on hitting the youth, on really like influencing their mind. And what happened to me was I went through various stages of being quite melancholic and depressed. And for me, I found that self pleasuring to fantasies and porn was an outlet. It made me feel better. It made me feel pleasure. And it became a bit of an escape. And it kind of set this pattern that kind of went all the way into my adulthood. There'd be stages when I'd get a handle on it, especially as I was studying sacred sexuality and different means and being in partnership with women. I started to realize this is a very deleterious behavior. but nonetheless, it was still like coming back and forth. It was this, when people do their shadow work, it's usually this kind of long, meandering journey because there's also ancestral wounds there and such. Um, but I found myself getting lost in a lot of fantasies and escapism. And it wasn't really until my 30s that I really started to go deep into what porn addiction is and what it's doing, and then started to get on the pathway to recovery. And it's still a journey. I'm definitely in a very beautiful place with it all at this moment. But with any addictive cycle, you always have to kind of be vigilant. And truly, it is a process of sublimation. It's about starting to find more beautiful ways to express sexuality. And in sacred sexuality, there's a lot of emphasis on being very present, on the tenderness of coupling, on using touch as a form of prayer, even slowing things down, and then enthusing the sexual energy to be these very voluptuous energies in the body that are then circulated throughout the whole body rather than this kind of fast track to orgasm and this very superficial lust. In my book, I have this one quote that I ran into a woman the other day, and she was like, I love this quote from your book where I say, all ejaculation is premature. Because in the sacred sexual tradition, it's all about like trying to have a sexual experience that could last for hours, especially considering a woman's body, a woman's soul needs a lot more of that softening and that tenderness to open up all those channels to her heart, which is really where the lovemaking starts to become a true making of love. So the process of healing is really about then establishing and creating this new version of sexuality. And that's where we can all get excited and be pioneers. And that's where my life started to really become much more constructive as I started to realize, hey, there's a whole other choice that I can make from this, which can be hard when you're in the quagmire of addiction to realize you still have free will. But you always have this ability to wield your will, kind of like the flaming sword of Archangel Michael. That's how I always like to look at the will from a Gnostic teacher's perspective. Um, and when you start to really have those victories and start to abstain and then create this new pathway, that's when the rubber starts to really hit the road. Um, and now from that healing journey, I'm inspired to share more of that, to be vulnerable with others, to let them know that there is this wound to wisdom road. And that truly at the end of the day, if we're going to have really consummate healing around these things, we need a culture around us to then reinforce what we're creating. And that's something I've done some work with Dr. Gabor Mate, and that's something that he talks a lot about in the work with trauma and healing addictions is like, how do we then create a culture to hold those who have recovered? Um, and that's truly where I'm trying to aim my work now with the writing of books and the teaching of my courses and workshops.
Mm. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing this with us. It's such an important topic, as you said. Like we, in our Western world, in society, we shy away from sexuality, but at the same time, it's very much thrown aggressively into our face. And yes, there's this push and pull with it. And going back to teenagers, when I look at the teenagers out there, they always seem angry. There always a lot of anger with them. And it's because they don't really have any guidance at all. The adults have become too busy and running around, and there's no direction and guidance for what's going on in their body. Like our body is the image of our physical, like our Mother Earth, our bones and our tissue and our blood and all of that, and our hormones is part of all of that. And we can't separate or hide or suppress, yeah, then there's anger and it comes out in different aggressive, passive aggressive ways. Let's just
Yeah.
go back a little bit. Like, thank you so much for sharing. This was beautiful. But just to go back to where do these sexual wounds come from? Because it's
Mm.
goes so much deeper, way back into our history.
Yes, yes, and a huge part of my book Love's Revolution is, to borrow a shamanic term, stalking that wound, like really trying to figure out where's the root of that, and that really came in my own self studies of my own neuroses, like trying to understand where did this come from, and of course when one starts to do the work, and a lot of the workshops and the courses that I teach, I try and plug people into what's known as the mythopoetic, which is studying the grand narrative stories that our ancient ancestors used to be coalesced with. Because in the ancient traditions, there was always a story that the culture was situated in. And this is why a lot of Westerners get super into yoga and this pantheon of gods and goddesses, Shiva, Ganesha. People are craving this, and that's why we love movies like Lord of the Rings, because they have these archetypal figures like the magician in Gandalf and the warrior king in Aragon. And so for me, when I start to really look into this, it first took me into the threads around religion. I was raised Catholic, and when I started to become a student of mythology, I started to realize that there was a classical European period before the rise of Roman Christianity, of paganism, cultures that very much worshipped the goddess, that were devoted to a much more multidimensional spirituality that looks a lot like Tantra in some ways, very bonded to the earth, very bonded to nature. And I started to realize that there was something to pull on from the ancestors here. And I started to look at the symbology, because mythology is just filled with these symbolic stories. The snake, for instance, was always supposed to be symbolic of the wisdom goddess Sophia, who is said to be Mother Earth. And of course, that takes me to probably the story that in itself encapsulates the wounding of our sexuality, is the Adam and Eve story in the fall of the Garden of Eden in the Old Testament, in the Bible. And in my book, Love's Revolution, I actually start the book with this short story I wrote called The Rise of Eve. Because when I looked at this old story, I could see the sexual wound was glaringly clear there. Because if you remember, Eve is tempted by the snake, who is villainized, into eating this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is only supposed to be a knowledge that the gods are supposed to know. Humans are cut off from this, censored from this knowledge. So she eats this fruit and then tempts Adam to eat the fruit. The seductress, she all of a sudden gets labeled also villainized, and women for thousands of years then paid the price for this like misunderstood rendering of women as this proponent of evil. And then after they both fall, it's quite symbolic what happens. You would think many things could happen after the fall of paradise. There could be a tidal wave like a flood with Noah, there could be fire raining down from the sky, but no, they cover their naked bodies in shame, particularly their genitals. Now, I find that a very interesting detail. It's very big and bold detail that there was something in that moment where they felt ashamed of their nakedness, of their bodies. And that's where you start to see this repression of our nature start to take foot. Um, Now, another symbol that really helps render this is if you go back before all of the Judeo Christian stuff. And I made a blog post on my blog, The Reenchantment, the other day about the roots of toxic masculinity. There's this figure called Cernunnos, or Pan, the great god of nature. And he is a centaur. So he's half deer or half a stag and half a man. So he has like deer legs, and then he's got this manly body, and he wears like oracle animal bones. He holds all these different totem objects that are all symbolic of his connection to the goddess that is Earth. And then he's got these giant horns coming out of his head, which is where the root word of horny comes from. And he is this beautiful symbol of the masculine in its balance of the animal and the human, because we have these more animalistic the first three chakra impulses. And the pagans, they understood this, these indigenous Europeans. So they had these mythological figures that would inspire in men and women this more integrated humanity. And of course, what ended up happening to Cernunnos, the god of nature, is that he became the devil. The idea of the devil with the horns, filled with fire. He's on fire, like he's like this masculine who hasn't any idea how to control that yang, fiery energy. So he's just filled with fire and imbalance. And to me, that was like another grave wound that happened in the shaming of this more potent male sexuality. I mean, Cernunnos would make love to the earth every springtime. They had this very erotic depiction of the cycles of nature. And on the Beltane celebration, which was around May 1st, in certain Celtic villages, all the villagers would go and make love on the fields at night with giant bonfires lining the hills, and they would send their fertility, their sexual energy into the land to help it grow. I mean, this is like incredible understanding of being bonded to nature. But with the rise of Judeo-Christianity, there was sort of this turn that started to happen, 3,000 years ago. And we start to then move into this kind of tyranny of religion, these monolithic religions that started to slowly, slowly constrain and persecute more of these pagan, indigenous, natural impulses in our humanity. And of course, sexuality is one of the wounds that is so old because when you shame someone's sexuality, in the Vedic culture of India, the sacral chakra, the second chakra is called Swadhisthana, it means one's own dwelling. If your sexuality is shamed, you don't feel at home in your body. You become disembodied. And the body is where truth is. It's a feeling sense that you have in your body. And the last thing I'll quickly share on this is I love the work of Wilhelm Reich. I don't know if you've read Reich before. He's this psychologist who was a contemporary of Freud and Jung's. He was persecuted by the Nazis, escaped. He eventually moved to America. But he wrote this book in the 1940s or 50s, I believe, called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, where he literally psychoanalyzed the Nazis and all fascism. And he said there was this common thread that human beings have an inner authority inside of them. As I just mentioned, it's like a feeling in your gut. You feel truth as a vibration. If someone says something to you, you can tell in a primal level if it's true or not. Now, whether you act upon it is a different thing, because that has to go through all the filters of your ego to then be expressed in the world. And Reich says that fascist states come into power and they bludgeon humanity with these repressive norms, particularly around sexuality, so that that body energy is no longer acknowledged as like a sensuous wisdom, but it's constrained, it's tightened around, it's made all this, there's all this tension in the body called character armor. And that creates a lot of chaos in the internal world where we don't know what is true anymore. We don't feel deeply enough. We don't acknowledge our feelings as an authority anymore. And then what ends up happening is these authority figures outside of us, these external figures, these tyrants, they show up and they say, I am the high priest, I am the leader, I have the authority. Listen to me, I'm the one speaking the truth. And because people are cut off from feeling, in their body, they look up and they're like craving someone to just guide them. And they let that authority then become, their ruler. So it's really it's a meandering wound, as they all should be. When you start to stalk these wounds through the collective traumas, it goes all over the place. And I talk a lot about these threads in the book.
Yes, thank you. That book, the other book that you were talking about sounds really, really
Yes.
interesting as well. I wanted to make a point with some of the other speakers too that have been talking a lot about wounds that have pushed us out of our physical body has been a little bit of a theme here. So
Mm.
that's really, really interesting that when we're not fully within our physical bodies, uh, we don't know how to we don't know what the truth is,
Yeah.
what is
So
our
profound.
yes, where what we can't find, we lose our wisdom, we lose our direction and guidance in life. And so this is a really amazing topic. I'd like to go into, we can see our wounds, we see how social media and the movies and pop culture, all of that plays out for us with it. How do we come back to ourselves? How do we start to heal these wounds? And what does that even look like when we have
Mm.
healed the wounds? Where do we go from there?
It's a great question. Well, I mean, to kind of tie into what you had just mentioned, I mean, I love that this theme of kind of disembodiment, pathological disembodiment, is coming up a lot because kind of the sub theme of this talk was devotional embodiment, which is a phrase that I kind of coined because I truly believe that it really begins in the simplicity of a consistent present awareness practice. I mean, when I look back on my journey in spirituality, one of the biggest life changing books for me, and it sounds cliche, was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. But specifically in that book, I remember in one of the earliest editions, he had these little symbols in the book. And he said right at the beginning of the book, whenever you see this symbol, I want you to take a few breaths and feel your present moment awareness. Now, the genius of what Tolle then elaborates is he says present moment awareness can be anchored in a feeling of the energy of the body. And I remember putting that book down in that moment and like all of a sudden just turning my senses inside, and I could all of a sudden feel this vibratory energy, particularly in the palms of the hands, because I used to practice Chinese medicine, and the hands are actually highly connected to the heart. This is why we do healings of through our hands. And so that's usually one of the most powerful vibrational fields in the body is the hands. And I could feel this. And because it was happening in real time, that energy field is shimmering right in that moment, just like the heart is beating in the present moment. There's the heart can't daydream about the past or future, that you die. So it really is understanding that presence, to be present, means to be very connected to the body. It doesn't, when we start to think, we move up into this abstract arena of the intellect, of the mind, and we need to start discerning what is the experience that we have of the mind. Well, if you really just watch yourself for a whole day, I'm teaching my Kings of the Heart men's program right now, and we're moving through the magician archetype, and their task for the week is be vigilant on when you daydream into past and future. How often during the day can you catch yourself? Because that's a kind of dreaming. You're almost falling asleep at the wheel. When you come into this present moment, your breath is like the portal, it's the bridge that takes you in, and then you feel your body, and then you take that into your activities in life. It's a very different form of consciousness. Then all of a sudden, mundane things like washing the dishes, if you're very sensuously connected to your hands, the feel of the water, um, it becomes this delicious experience of being embodied. And then people start to realize that our bodies are actually highly benumbed because we do so much time in the thinking, in the brain. The body is actually robbed of feeling a lot of this vital energy. And then in Chinese medicine and all these other ancient forms of medicine, the body has this whole wisdom technology to it. For instance, in Chinese medicine, the visceral organs, such as the lungs, the heart, the liver, the spleen, every organ is kind of its own intelligence. It provides its own guidance, its own wisdom. Western medicine's finally starting to realize this. We found neurons, brain cells in the heart. We found that the gut is almost like a second brain. We're starting to realize that we actually regressed. The Dark Ages was kind of like we lost a certain intelligence, and now we're kind of coming back full circle and pulling it all together. But when someone starts to live in their body and starts to discern these different states of consciousness, there's that what we call the discursive egoic mind when I'm not in my body and I'm just in this abstract thinking, it tends to be very dualistic. This, that, right, wrong, good, bad, past, future. However, when you come into the present, this very different experience happens. One of the most common things that happens when someone gets in their body, takes a few deep breaths, and comes present in their body, is there's a synthesis that happens. An insight will suddenly emerge. A problem they've been facing that they've been looking for a resolution for will suddenly come to them as if they're guided. This is said to be the powers of the heart. When you drop down, you come into the heart. The heart is where heaven and earth have their rendezvous, as the Taoists call it. So when I work one on one, because I do one on one mentoring, coaching, and sound healing with people, if they're in a very stressful emotional situation, such as heartbreak in their life, or they're very confused around something, I often tell them to find a space in nature, because nature is always vibrating in this present moment, this very serene energy. And then take a few breaths, sit down, take a few deep breaths, come into more of a sense of your body, the present moment, and then just be in that. The next stage would be in contemplation, which is meditative thinking. Then take whatever that issue is, bring it into this relaxed presence. And time again, people come to me the next session, they email, they're like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. All of a sudden, all these like answers were coming to me. That's what the Taoists call the guiding realm. So on a very basic level, and I mean, this is basic, but this is also a lifelong thing, because to be in presence, to be devotionally embodied, because it really is about understanding, okay, my body is where this presence is really happening. when you start to get this guidance, when you start to realize there's this wisdom that's perpetually flowing that we're often just ignoring, that's when it becomes devotional, because you start to realize when I follow this wisdom, this guidance, life usually starts to take on a much more opportunistic, beautiful flavor. There's more beautiful circumstances come to bear. There's more intelligence that comes to bear too. When I'm calm, when I'm gathered in myself, I can give more of myself to the situations at hand. So, on a very just basic level, coming into inner body awareness, as Tolle calls it, and just being present as much as possible is just like a basic way that we can start healing this separation wound, which is really one of the great wounds.
Yes. And as you were speaking too, I was thinking another thing is that people can begin to fall in love with their body again. There's
Hmm.
there's so much wrapped up on, how a body should look like, a woman's body, a male's body, and it drives me crazy. It's like, oh, and even though, you try to have a healthier mindset with your body, those messages that float out there really do get into your mind, into the subconscious. And I think, again, what you were talking about of being more present, being more within, you can sort of stop that flow and really begin to honor and love this beautiful vessel that we're in, which again, like I said, going back to Mother Earth, is we are her image. And again, there's that healing of love and respect between the two, ourselves and Mother Earth.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, eco spirituality, as I've been connecting to this paradigm,
Hmm.
of what you're talking about, really healing this wound that we have with nature. That is so potent and important, especially in the spiritual realm, because you get into the spiritual realm and there's a lot of what Robert Bly calls the flying boys and girls, like flying into these mystical heights and I want to ascend and all this galactic stuff, which is cool. There's no doubt it's part of it. But what I'm seeing is people are being kind of ripped away from really just connecting to nature. And we're now seeing this kind of ramping up in cities and in civilized places of this technosphere, all this AI integration, this almost transhumanist kind of thing happening. And I think people are going to realize at a certain point, we don't want more of this artificial stuff. Like something different happens to me when I'm in nature. Just by being in nature, there's a healing that's happening, whether it's the pheromones from the trees, the sunlight, which is such a medicine par excellence, and just the clean, crisp air, but also the beauty, does something to the soul. And as you say, we are made by Mother Earth. This is the Gnostic teaching, this is the indigenous teachings all over the world. The goddess that she is has been exiled, and we need to bring her back in. Because as we're confronted with AI and all kinds of stuff, there is this bewildering confusion right now. What does it mean to be a human? In fact, even further, there's like a misanthropy. There's almost this hatred of being a human. You see this in a lot of the very extreme environmentalist circles. This like, oh, humanity's just a cancer. Like, Mother Earth would just be so much better if we were just off the planet. It's like, no, no. According to the ancient Gnostic story, she turned into a planet to help humanity be sustained. She's obviously not maybe happy with what's going on, but she's doing everything she can to support us, and she's resilient. And a lot of it is coming back to her arms, spending time in nature. John Lamb Lash, this beautiful teacher, he says, the religion of the earth is beauty. And it's so true. When you find yourself in a beautiful landscape, I mean, I live here in Costa Rica. I've got the ocean just over there in the distance. There's waterfalls everywhere. One of the reasons I moved here was just to be swaddled in her beauty every day. And it changes you. It changes your character. It cultivates a more virtuous beingness. It allows the tensions of modernity to melt away. And that's just by the simple fact of just bonding with her, just going out for more walks in nature. It's one of my indigenous teachers used to say, every day you got to spend some meaningful time with Mother Earth. It's essential for human beings.
Yes, definitely beautiful. Thank you. So going back to, because I have your book too. I
Yes.
got your Love's Revolution. I
Oh, there it
haven't, I
is.
just started a little bit of it, but I will get into it.
Oh,
I'm very
good.
excited.
It's a
Very
biggie.
excited. It is a big, it is big. Um, can you just go into, I know you've talked a little bit about it, but maybe what your book can offer the world right now?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Love's Revolution, it's my first book. I released on the spring equinox last year, 2022 or 2023 rather. And this was a 4-year process. It's a collection of writings. It's poems, essays, and these two short stories. And it's on the themes of sacred sexuality, what I call divine romance, because especially when you study some of the ancient traditions, romance had this kind of flavor of being a part of the spiritual path. And then conscious partnership, which is this incredible paradigm of seeing that relationships can be used as accelerators for growth in the world. And I believe that's one of the biggest services this book can do is just illuminating this terrain, because I know a lot of intimate partnerships are in this kind of languid state of, yeah, just people are very despondent. There's so many divorces. People don't know how to maintain long relationships. There's inevitably, when you soul blend with someone, which is what sacred sexuality is all about, love wants no barriers, it wants no walls. So after that beautiful honeymoon phase, when you meet that new thing and all your dopamines firing all over the place, once you start to ground into an actual relationship, it becomes this work. It becomes, you slowly start to unmask and reveal yourselves to each other. And because humanity hasn't been taught how to deal with their shadows or any kind of psychological maneuvering or integration work, which should be like all basic, youthful education, it scares people. They get freaked out. It triggers them when they see another person's wounds, they see their wounds, or they see their father or their mother in the other. And there's this whole morass, this quagmire of psychological noise that starts to happen in woundedness. Whereas in the conscious partnership paradigm, it's all about shining a light into that, saying, hey, this is awesome. This is why we've come together. We've come together to do this work. If we can learn how to communicate better to each other, understand triggers and projections, understand all this terrain of psychology, such as if you do something that triggers me, that's maybe something I need to look into. And then there's also this deeper passageway about men and women and how we are configured in this very different way. Women spiral with the moon in this very quick transformational cycle once a month. And when women are on their moon time, that's a very intense time for her. She loses like 80% of her energy. She becomes this like living oracle. And it can be this kind of tempestuous time for her psyche. And a lot of men have not been taught about these cycles. I mean, men should be tracking their partner's cycles so they can know this is a time when she needs me to be nurturing, to hold space, to not take anything personally. Um, and then men go through a solar cycle more or less once a year. If they live in northern climes, autumn and into the winter, the solar energy moves away. That's when men tend to be challenged, in mental health, and they get depressed and they get very sad because they're going into their own little dark night of the soul movement. So working with these cycles, understanding what they are, can bring more bondedness together. And then, of course, sacred sexuality. When someone learns to use sexuality as a healing force to create wholeness, we can really have this angelic embrace, the soul blending, where the energies can be enthused to circulate throughout the whole body, melting blockages, activating centers, taking it into the sphere of feeling like one with the divine through the sexual experience, which can just be as easily accessed as just deeply breathing during sex. That creates this embodied sense of mysticism where people start to realize, like, wow, my sexual experience can be expanded and become this mystical, even psychedelic experience. So profound. And it can then be not a draining of the love, but this constant regeneration of this bondedness between these two beings. So in the book, a lot of this terrain is covered. As I mentioned, there's The Rise of Eve. The first short story is a retelling of that Garden of Eden story with Eve as this heroic protagonist who is guided by the serpent of wisdom into the forest to eat of this sacred fruit that initiates her on a psychedelic journey to come into rapport with the great goddess herself, where she's taught sexual alchemical magic, which she then takes back and teaches Adam. So placing woman in the role of teacher of men. Um, that was my attempt to sort of reverse what I saw as a black magic spell in that initial Old Testament
Mhm.
version of it. And people are loving that story, women especially, and I'm so pleased to hear that because that was really one of my intentions. And then the final story in the book um, is a spiritual erotic short story between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And there's a little essay before that about the importance of Magdalene, why she is showing up in our consciousness now. It's this return of the divine feminine. You know, if we're really going to transform and alchemize patriarchy, it's really about like not taking down men. It's about like actually bringing women up and finding this way to braid them together so we can have this truly egalitarian culture. And Magdalene is really showing up to show that it wasn't just about Jesus. Maybe the Christ was both of them. Maybe it was their partnership. Maybe there was this skillful love, this divine romance that they were having. Maybe they had children. Who knows? But it provides this different context, and it's a very erotic story because I wanted to present in a visceral way that Jesus may have been a very sexual being as well, and that's holy. That shouldn't cause people to be like, blasphemy. No, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful because that's the terrain. As I say, sexuality is the flower of embodiment. You know, when you're fully embodied, then sexuality becomes this incredibly joyful experience. And then there's tons of poems and essays in between those short stories. So you can kind of read it start to finish, or I even tell people you can just Oracle book it, just open up at a random page, and there's all these different chapters, you know, of different themes to take people through this deep journey.
That sounds great. I have to say that's one of the reasons why I bought the book is because I received your newsletter to do with the story of Eve. And
Mm.
when I read about what, you talked about in Eve, that's what really excited me about this. So that's why I bought the book because Eve is always she's always put down. She's always looked on as, the villainous and sort of doesn't really represent women at all. Like there's just I could never connect with her. And I got so excited when I read um, that, like, just no, she's actually this very powerful and intelligent and adventurous woman. And I think we're all like women, especially, are just craving that right now. And I just wanted to
Yes.
also, yes, yeah, definitely. And I wanted to point out too, it's Lilith is always the one who we're told to look at as she's sort of a badass one, the one who has that, strong, independent. She's the one who told Adam, like, no, I'm not going to be in that sexual position. I'm out of here. And then you would look like, oh, well, Eve went for it. She, um, was the
Yes.
submissive one.
Well, if I
And
could
so,
quickly share, there's a
mm,
little passage here that inspired that story. So I'm a big student of the Nag Hammadi Library, which is this group of documents that was found in Egypt by a farmer in a cave on his land in 1945, and they're actually some of the only living documents we have of the pagans because they were so persecuted. So these were from the mystery schools, and this is a paragraph from there. It's from a chapter called "On the Origin of the World," and it writes, "What sort of creature is this luminous woman? Now, come, let us lay hold of her and cast our seed into her, that she may become soiled and unable to access her inner light. Then those who she bears will be under our charge." So, this is a demonic entity called the Archons, who are said to be antagonists to humanity. And they're kind of hiding in the bushes, watching Eve, and they're wanting to rape her and then soil her line with their energy. Then it goes on. But Eve, being a free power, laughed at their decision. she put mist in their eyes and escaped them. Like, holy shit, Eve's a fucking mystical ninja. And I just, when I read that, I was like, wow, the ancients really had a different depiction of Eve. She wasn't this like weak, submissive woman who got like duped by this villain serpent. No, she was kind of like Neo in the Matrix. She was able to deal with predatory beings with incredible mystical skill. Like, wow.
Yeah, no, when I read that, I got so excited and I was just like, yes, I can connect with her now. I want to know who she's all about. Like, this is great. And it's like that should be the story in the Bible, not the other one.
Yes, I know. I mean, I would love to make a film on this story. A few women have asked, like, could you make this into a film? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to somehow, because I do feel this story needs to be told increasingly to help reverse, you know. As a little
What?
gecko chirping, we always say that means truth is being spoken in Costa Rica.
That's perfect. Thank you. No, I think it would be amazing if you did a film on this because this really it needs to get out there. It needs
Mm,
the truth. It's about revealing truth. Our illusions are crumbling in this world. We're starting to see where, yeah, we
mm,
haven't been really been given the truth. We've been giving
mm,
a lot of lies, and
mm,
it's time to clear that away. And
mm.
especially when it comes to what is a real woman, what is a real man, stop
Yes.
hiding, from our wounds as well as what sexuality is really about, where it's power and it's mystery and magic, and not just going through motions that don't really have any meaning and leave us sort of empty in the end.
Well said. Totally agree.
Yeah, yeah. Is there a particular work for men in the realm of sacred sexuality and tantra?
There is. I mean, the beauty of a lot of the tantric traditions that I've studied is that there are tasks that men and women both kind of have to take on to create this reunion. Because there is this kind of reunion that needs to happen in culture. The last 2,000 years, patriarchy is really the story of ripping apart Adam and Eve, of ripping apart this more united cultural unity that a lot of these ancient cultures speak to, that men and women were more egalitarian, were ruling together. You had the god, you had the goddess. But of course, being a man myself and having that as more of my intimate experience in reality, I've been very enthused into the realm of what's known as men's work. And well over a decade now ago, I found the work of the archetypes, and that took me into a deep dive into the masculine psychology. And I think the main thing men have to realize is that because there's this endowment, generally speaking, in men of more of this young, fiery, potent energy, um, that when we look around us, sexuality is still, it's like weaponized against men. And this goes for women as well, I'm sure. But I think there's a particular weapon against men in the over titillation of sexualized images of women in culture. And of course, this bleeds into social media a lot too, because sex sells. And now with social media, you have this huge wave of entrepreneurship where everyone's trying to use their social media as a platform to sell their business, to sell their products, to sell their coaching, to sell their programs, which is great. And I did a talk on this a while ago called, is Instagram soft porn? And I had to handle this with care because when you start to work on men's and women's work together, there's a lot of triggers, there's a lot of ancient wounds there. But the fact is, when I delved into a lot of the pornography addiction work that I did, a lot of men were saying that to really come into a moment of conscious chastity, which is really what is needed to regroup, to regenerate a more harmonic hormonal system that hasn't been so ravaged by overstimulation, you have to start putting up boundaries around you. And foremost is of course, not going to conventional porn sites. You cut yourself off from that. But a lot of men will then attest that Instagram is kind of like the last stand for a lot of men because there's just so many sexualized images. And then the algorithms, first thing in the morning, you'll go on Instagram and there's like a sexual image that's thrown at you. So for men, there's this hyper vigilance that has to take place. And this isn't about being some kind of celibate monk, but it's about realizing that sexuality has this energy that can both sting and anoint us with something beautiful. And if we don't take care, we can be played by this energy. I'm trying to find this quote because there's a beautiful quote in this book that I share at some point. I don't know where it is, but it's by an ancient Greek philosopher, and he's praying to like great spirit, and he's saying, "Please let me learn how to use my sexuality in a equanimous and a balanced way, because I know, the Cupid's arrow, if it cuts too deep, it's a mortal wound. It's like this poison of being intoxicated with lust and this inner fire, and you just want to consume." And in the esoteric realm, there's these things called the succubi. There's these female demons, and I've encountered them in my dream work, that are like vampiring, that are parasitically stealing sexual energy from men as well. And when you delve into a lot of this healing, you realize and you have to handle this with care, because when we go into like words like demonic, it can bring out these very exaggerated understandings of these things. These are just entities in our midst. There's a whole mysticism, there's a metaphysical realm to our dimension. And really what I'm trying to say is that men are often victimized by their sexuality. They're being used by it. They're ejaculating too much, which is another huge thing that men need to take on. Women have this kind of more supreme station, this more exalted station than men, naturally speaking, in that their essence, their menses, what we call in Chinese medicine, their jing, is timed and primed for once a month being released in the ova. Whereas with men, they can choose to release as much semen as they want in a whole day. So women are kind of very intimately bound to nature. Men, not so much. And a man needs to take control of how he sows his seed. And this is why this whole movement of semen retention is becoming very popular among men. And it's a great thing. We should be celebrating it because it's training men to be true conservationists. And then when the semen is kept in, when the jing is kept in, jing is like your soul's blood. It enthuses the virtues in your soul. It brings a very divine energy into your body. And men really need to take on this work, because if they don't, they're going to be constantly dissipating this energy. They're going to be in a state of weakness, and they won't have the energy to vault into some of the higher dynamic archetypal work, which is the warrior and the king, because the world is bereft of that true noble king and noble warrior, and that needs to come online now more than ever. So men need to do that, but there is this reunion work where women and men, eventually the men's and the women's work has to coalesce in this higher transcendent dynamic where we interpenetrate and we mutually support each other. And that work can really start by starting to get curious about each other's wounds. And I've held circles like this over the years with some of my ex-partners where they were running women's circles, I was running men's circles. We bring them together just to share, what is your wounds? Share about our wounds. Let's get grieving together about how we're both victimized. One of the big revelations of patriarchy is that it's messing up men and women and men. We're both being used and distorted by this thing. And I think the eventual ultimate healing that takes place amongst men and women will only take place through that work with each other. So, men have to eventually get to a point where they treat woman's body as this holy chalice to help move her more into her heart space, using the sexual energy to really charge this Shakti goddess heart, this living embodiment of love that women have, this more electric heart that they have. It's reversed in men. And then women need to sort of help men to sort of calm their passions so that they can last longer, so the experience of sex can be elaborated into these more ecstatic realms where the energy does really pivot into something very healing and rejuvenating.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. So much wisdom and insight here. Thank you so much again, Darren. Unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time. So
Should I read something?
oh yes, do please. Yes, read something. You can read something.
Okay. Okay. I feel so compelled because I just love this the writing in here so much. And it's a great on topic story. So this is a poem called The True Tit, and it's about me longing for an ex-partner in this kind of codependent way, and eventually realizing that I'm seeking for the Great Mother, and to not seek that in a woman, but to seek that in my own relationship to the goddess. So it's called The True Tit. Circling back to you, to that hope, to that possibility as I lunge over all ramparts, over all caution, as I always do. The road to access leads to wisdom. Blake. Fucking Blake. I smirk, at least, at best, for I loved here a ghostly dream, so beautiful that I was convinced that, well, anyhow. I watch you flitting about our house like a damsel without distress. Oh, how I wish for distress, but that script never works. I watch and I bury my moans in midnight vigils before a candling prayer, lighting again flames of hopeless hope. I reach for your heart and it passes right through, and I howl secretly so you will not see how far I have gone again into the meadows of love, lost in the lunacy of flowers. But the howling eventually will not remain silent until they are sipped by your distant ears, making you frown in annoyance. And then you steal in the night to another's home, and I want to be crucified then, nails in every limb, a lamb for love. So terribly, I eventually have to flee deep into the jungle, to howl freely, long enough that I can build a hermitage in their end, and ask the important questions to the roots of wounds, stay long in vigil enough to listen to their whispering answers. My mother is there, of course, with her failed, parted wrists, and her closed doors before which I sob for salvation, asking again for suckle of a tit, to confer on me the living I am scared to bestow on myself. I make a cradle in my arms for boy me, and we weep together until streams are weaving to the river below, carrying us away to circle again with the mysteries of life. This time, breaking again my heart, but this time I am ready with the jungle and the solitude to break it deep enough to crack the essence, spilling open with watery light, which I sip, suckle from the tit of the Great Mother, rising within me, filling me with life.
That was
Thank you for letting
beautiful.
me share. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. No, that was
Available
beautiful.
on Amazon.
No, that was
Fortunately or
beautiful.
unfortunately.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. That was, we needed to hear that. That was great. Just beautiful.
Thanks,
And
Amanda.
again,
Thank you.
once more, Love's Revolution by Darren Austin Hall, and you can find it on Amazon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And also, Darren is sharing or giving us a free offering today, which sounds beautiful as well. This is a song that Darren has channeled for the divine masculine, a very powerful sound healing experience. So please check out this free offering. You can find it in the link below this interview. So thank you for this, Darren. It sounds beautiful. And
Thank you.
before we finish, can you just let everybody know where we can find you online? And if you have any last things you want us to let us know, feel free to share.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, Amanda. It's been absolutely a thrilling dialogue with you, and thank you for letting me share so much. And the best way is, for better or for worse, on Instagram at Darren Austin Hall is where I am probably the most engaged. But I also have a YouTube channel if you search my name, Darren Austin Hall. And I have loads of albums and recordings on Spotify and Apple Music. Again, Darren Austin Hall. And my website, darrenaustinhall.com, is about to be reborn And a lot of my online courses, I teach a lot online and I tour as well back in North America and Europe throughout the summer. And then I live in Costa Rica and offer my source resonance sound healing intensives here once a year. Um, but there's many ways to find me online in all those different spheres. And just a delight. And, I'm really just giving a lot of love and energy to the continued awakening of humanity. The time is now, and I'm very defiantly hopeful, despite all the chaos in the world, that we are rising like a phoenix from the ashes, and it is time to reclaim our divinity and to express in a whole new octave. And um, very blessed to be alive in this time of holy shift with and just witnessing humanity rising is so extraordinary and beautiful.
It is a very exciting time to be here and to be with you and everybody around the world. Like we're doing this together. It's just wonderful. Just great to be alive right now.
Mm.
So once more, thank you again for sharing your beautiful wisdom and insight, your beautiful poetry, your book, your music. It's all just so loving and supportive and inspiring. So thank you once more. I also want to thank our listeners, our audience. Thank you for being with us. I hope you can take something away with you with this. Make sure you check out Darren's free gift. Have a gorgeous, beautiful, loving day, and I will see you all soon.